They thought the camera would see a suspect, but by the time the footage ended, it had exposed something far more dangerous. The late afternoon sun hung low over Fulton Avenue, casting a copper glow across the gas station lot and the row of faded storefronts beside it, where heat still shimmered off the pavement even though the clock on the repair shop window read 5:12 p.m. Naomi Carter stood beside her dark blue Honda Accord with the hood raised, one hand braced against the frame and the other wrapped around a rag already stained with motor oil. Her work badge still clipped to the waistband of her slacks from the nursing home where she had just finished a double shift. A thin line of sweat traced the side of her face, but she didn't complain, didn't panic, didn't call attention to herself. She just kept trying to fix what she could with the calm determination of someone who had spent most of her life solving problems before they got the chance to swallow her whole. The car had coughed twice at the red light, lurched once, then died half a block later as if the day itself had decided it hadn't taken enough from her yet. So she had guided it into the corner of the gas station lot, popped the hood, and started checking what she knew how to check. Battery connection, coolant cap, loose cable, anything. Around her, the ordinary world kept moving. A pickup truck rolled past the pumps. Ice rattled in a soda machine. Somewhere near the road, a child laughed, then fell quiet. Naomi barely noticed any of it. She was focused on the engine, on the smell of hot metal and gasoline, on the ache in her shoulders, and the simple prayer forming quietly in her chest that the car would start before dark. Then she heard it, the sound that always changed the air before anything else did, the slow crunch of tires, the dry crackle of a radio, the slam of a patrol car door. She looked up and saw two officers approaching from the edge of the lot, white uniforms catching the sun, mirrored sunglasses reflecting her back at herself like she had already become something else in their eyes. Officer Blake Turner moved first, broad-shouldered, jaw-tight, one hand resting near his belt as if suspicion had already hardened into certainty before a word had been spoken. Officer Ryan Cole followed half a step behind, younger, quieter, but not quiet enough to stop what was about to happen. Blake glanced at the open hood, then at Naomi's oil-streaked hands, then at the car. "Step away from the vehicle," he said, his voice flat and sharp. Naomi blinked once, confused more than afraid. "It's my car," she replied, holding up the rag instinctively as though the truth could be that simple. "It stalled out, and I'm trying to—" "Ma'am," Blake cut in, louder this time. "Step away from the vehicle now." The words landed hard in the heavy heat, turning the whole parking lot still. Naomi straightened slowly, her keys visible in her hand, her face calm but tired, the kind of tired that comes from being forced to explain your own existence one too many times. Across the lot, above the gas pumps and under the awning, a tiny red camera light blinked without mercy, capturing everything. Naomi did not move right away, not because she was refusing, but because there was something deeply exhausting about being spoken to like a threat when all she had done was stand in the heat with grease on her hands and a dead battery under an open hood. She lowered the rag slowly and looked from Officer Blake Turner to Officer Ryan Cole, measuring the space between their badges and their assumptions, the way one had already decided who she was and the other had already decided not to interfere. "My registration is in the glove compartment," she said carefully, keeping her voice even. "My key is right here, and the title is in my purse on the passenger seat." Blake did not glance at the key. He did not ask for the title. His eyes stayed fixed on her with the kind of suspicion that did not want facts because facts would ruin the story he had started writing the moment he stepped out of that cruiser. "You expect me to believe that?" he said, sweeping a look over the car as if Naomi herself were the least trustworthy part of it. "You are standing in a gas station parking lot with the hood up, saying this is yours, and we are just supposed to take your word for it." Naomi drew in a breath and felt the last of her patience tighten into something steadier. She knew this tone. She knew the silent crowd that formed around it. She knew what happened when a simple moment stopped being about truth and started being about power. Near Pump 3, a man filling up his pickup slowed his movements and turned his head. A woman standing by a silver minivan paused with her hand on the door handle, her young son peering out from the back seat. Inside the convenience store, the cashier stopped stocking a shelf and looked through the glass. The world had not stopped, but it had begun to watch. "I am not asking you to take my word for it," Naomi said. "I am telling you where the documents are. Ryan shifted slightly at that, just enough for Naomi to notice he had heard the reason in her voice. But Blake took one step closer, and his expression hardened. "Keep your hands where I can see them," he said. "You people always have an answer ready." The sentence did not need to be louder to hit harder. It landed in the hot evening air and seemed to drain the color from the moment. Naomi felt it like a door closing, not just on fairness, but on dignity. Still, she kept her chin level. "Officer, I have done nothing wrong," she said. Blake gave a short laugh that held no humor. "That is what everyone says." Ryan finally spoke, his voice lower, almost uncertain. "Maybe we should check the plate first." For a moment, Naomi thought the tension might loosen, that the ordinary logic of a license plate and a registration card might rescue the situation before it fully became what she feared. But Blake did not look at Ryan. He kept staring at Naomi as if her calm itself offended him. "Turn around," he said. Naomi's eyes widened, not with panic, but with the disbelief of someone watching a lie gain authority in real time. "For what?" she asked, and that was when a phone rose above the crowd. Then another, and across the lot Mrs. Evelyn Brooks, who owned the repair shop next door, stepped out under the fading sun, narrowed her eyes at the scene, and said in a voice sharp enough to carry, "Officers, every inch of this block is recorded, so you might want to slow down and get this right." For one suspended second, nobody moved. The evening air seemed to tighten around the gas station lot, thick with heat, exhaust, and the kind of silence that comes when people realize a line is about to be crossed in plain sight. Naomi stood with the key still visible in her hand, her shoulders straight even though every nerve in her body had gone taut. Mrs. Evelyn Brooks remained near the edge of the repair shop driveway, one hand on her hip, the other holding a shop rag darkened by years of honest work, her expression sharp and unflinching. She was in her late 60s, silver curls pinned back, reading glasses still hanging from a chain around her neck, and there was something about the way she held herself that made it clear she had seen too much in this country to mistake what was unfolding. "I know that woman," Evelyn said, louder this time, stepping forward just enough for everyone to hear. "She has had that car serviced here before. That is Naomi Carter. She is not stealing anything." Ryan Cole glanced toward her, and for the first time doubt became visible on his face. It was small, just a shift in the eyes, a slight hesitation in his posture, but it was there. Blake Turner, however, looked almost irritated by the interruption, as if truth itself had become an inconvenience. "Ma'am, step back," he said without taking his eyes off Naomi. "This is a police matter." Evelyn did not step back. "No," she replied, her voice level and steady. "This is a woman trying to get home." The little boy in the minivan across the lot pressed his face closer to the window, his mother now holding her phone fully upright, recording without saying a word. Near the pump, the man with the pickup quietly set the nozzle back in place and turned his whole body toward the scene. Through the glass storefront, the cashier picked up the counter phone, eyes never leaving the parking lot. Naomi could feel all of it, every stare, every held breath, every second stretching longer than it should. She had spent years learning how to stay composed in rooms that doubted her, in offices that underestimated her, in neighborhoods where people looked twice at a black woman driving alone in a decent car. But this was different. This was public. This was deliberate. This was the kind of moment that could leave a stain long after the handcuffs came off, even if nothing else happened. Blake extended his hand toward her, set the keys on the ground, and turned around. Naomi did not raise her voice. She did not plead. Instead, she looked past him, beyond the badge and the mirrored lenses and the rehearsed authority, straight toward the blinking camera mounted beneath the gas station awning. Then she looked at Evelyn, then at the phones lifted quietly around the lot, and something inside her settled. The fear did not vanish, but it changed shape. It became clarity. "Please make sure that footage is saved," she said, her voice calm enough to cut through the tension more sharply than a scream ever could. That sentence moved through the crowd like a current. Evelyn gave a single firm nod. The mother by the minivan lowered her phone just long enough to say, "I got it." Even Ryan seemed to stiffen at the words, as if he suddenly understood that this moment was no longer disappearing into the safety of a vague report or a convenient narrative. It was being witnessed, documented, preserved. Blake's jaw tightened. For a man used to controlling the story, there was something deeply threatening about a woman who had stopped arguing and started trusting the record instead. And as the red and blue reflections from the cruiser flickered across Naomi's oil-streaked hands, the balance of power began to shift in a way none of them could undo. Blake Turner had expected fear. He had expected tears, excuses, maybe a trembling apology from a woman too overwhelmed to fight the version of events he was already constructing in his head. What he had not expected was composure. He had not expected witnesses. And he had definitely not expected Naomi Carter to stop defending herself and start trusting the evidence around her. That was the moment something cold and stubborn settled over his expression, the look of a man who sensed control slipping and decided to grip harder instead of stepping back. "You are being detained until we sort this out," he said, each word clipped and deliberate, as though speaking with enough certainty could make it lawful. Naomi's fingers tightened slightly around the key before she slowly lowered her hand. "Detained for what?" she asked, her voice low but clear. "Standing next to my own car?" Ryan glanced again at the vehicle, then at the plate, then toward the dashboard where the registration might have been sitting exactly where she said it was. Logic was right there, inches away, easy to reach. But logic had stopped being the point. Blake stepped around the front bumper and moved toward the driver's side door. "We have reasonable suspicion," he said, though he did not explain of what. And in the fading light the phrase sounded less like procedure and more like a shield he could hide behind. Naomi turned her head toward him, disbelief flickering across her face before discipline took over again. "The key is in my hand," she said. "The title is inside. The registration is inside. The insurance card is inside. You could verify all of this in less than a minute." Evelyn Brooks gave a sharp nod from the edge of the lot. "She is right," she called out. "If you are here for the truth, it is sitting in that car." Several people murmured in agreement. The mother by the minivan had stepped out now, phone still recording, one hand protectively resting on the roof, while her son watched wide-eyed from the back seat. The man with the pickup folded his arms and remained silent, but the set of his jaw said enough. This was no longer a private misunderstanding. This was a public test of who got believed and who got controlled. Blake ignored the crowd. He opened the driver's door without asking, glanced inside, then turned back with a look that suggested he had found nothing that fit the story he wanted. That should have ended it. It should have forced a pause, an apology, at least a moment of embarrassment. Instead, it only seemed to irritate him further. "Turn around," he said again. Naomi did not move. "No," she answered, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet firmness of a woman who had spent too long being told to surrender to other people's assumptions. The lot seemed to inhale all at once. Ryan shifted his weight and lowered his voice. "Blake, maybe we should call this in first." Blake did not even look at him. "I said turn around." Naomi swallowed once, and though her heart was pounding now, she kept her face still. Imagine standing there after a 12-hour shift, your hands smelling like engine oil, your shoes still aching from work, and realizing that none of your facts matter because someone already decided what your skin meant before you spoke. Imagine understanding in real time that the most dangerous thing in that parking lot is not suspicion, but certainty without conscience. Naomi looked once more toward the camera under the awning, then toward the phones raised around her, and she knew this moment had moved beyond her. It belonged now to everyone watching, everyone recording, everyone who would later see exactly how easy it had been for power to mistake prejudice for proof. And as the evening shadows stretched longer across the concrete, the scene hardened into something no report would ever be able to rewrite. The click of metal was small, almost ordinary, but in that parking lot it sounded like something heavier than restraint. It sounded like a decision being made without truth, without patience, without the smallest effort to see Naomi Carter as anything more than a problem in the wrong skin at the wrong place. She stood still as Officer Blake Turner fastened the cuffs around her wrists, her face set in a calm that had cost her too much to learn. She did not cry out. She did not beg. She did not give him the performance he wanted. And somehow that dignity made the moment feel even crueler to the people watching, because there is something deeply unsettling about seeing a woman remain composed while being denied the basic courtesy of being believed. Ryan Cole stepped back the second it was done, his jaw tight, his eyes moving everywhere except Naomi's face. He looked at the cruiser, at the gas pumps, at the gathering bystanders, at the open hood of the Honda, as if he were searching the scene for some excuse that would make the image in front of him feel less wrong. But there was no fixing the optics now, not with 3 phones pointed straight at them, not with the gas station camera blinking steadily above, not with Evelyn Brooks standing at the edge of the lot like a witness carved out of steel and memory. "This is unnecessary," Evelyn said, each word hard and clean. "You checked nothing. You asked nothing. You saw a black woman and decided the rest." Blake turned toward her with a warning in his expression, but the authority in his posture no longer filled the space the way it had a few minutes earlier. The crowd had changed. At first they had watched with curiosity. Now they were watching with judgment. The mother beside the minivan spoke softly into her phone as she recorded. The man from the pickup shook his head once, slow and disbelieving. Even the cashier had come to the doorway now, one hand still on the glass, staring out at a scene that looked less like law enforcement and more like a lie in uniform. Naomi lifted her cuffed hands just slightly, enough to keep her balance, and drew a careful breath through the heat and gasoline and humiliation pressing against her chest. "My purse is on the passenger seat," she said evenly. "My registration is in the glove compartment. My insurance card is clipped to the visor. My name is on all of it." Blake gave a thin, impatient smile, the kind people wear when facts have become irritating. "You can explain that downtown," he said. Naomi looked directly at him then, and for the first time there was something in her expression that felt sharper than endurance. It was not rage. It was not fear. It was the quiet grief of a person recognizing that this had never been about confusion. He had hurt her. He had understood her. He had simply chosen not to care. Imagine standing under a burning Georgia sky after working all day, your hands still marked by labor, your body aching for home, and realizing the people sworn to protect order are willing to manufacture it by stripping yours away. Imagine realizing that innocence is not always enough when prejudice arrives wearing procedure. A breeze moved through the lot at last, lifting the edge of Naomi's work badge where it still hung from her waistband, and the little plastic card caught the light for one brief second before settling again. Ryan noticed it. His eyes dropped to the logo on the badge, then flicked toward the inside of the car, then back to Naomi. Something in his face changed, not into courage, not yet, but into the first unmistakable trace of alarm. Because the longer this went on, the harder it would be to pretend they had made an honest mistake. And somewhere beyond the siren lights and the stairs and the heavy air of public shame, the truth was no longer just waiting. It was building. Ryan Cole could not stop looking at Naomi's work badge. It hung there against the dark fabric at her waist, half twisted, catching the red and blue wash from the cruiser lights. And suddenly the whole scene felt less like a justified stop and more like a trap closing around the wrong people. He stepped closer to Blake and lowered his voice, but not low enough to hide the unease in it. "We should verify the vehicle information before we take her anywhere," he said. "We have the plate. We have the key. We have the documents she mentioned." Blake did not answer right away. His gaze stayed on Naomi, and in that silence there was something stubborn and dangerous, the kind of pride that would rather double down than admit it had judged too fast. Naomi stood with her cuffed hands held still in front of her, shoulders squared despite the strain, refusing to shrink for anyone. The heat had started to break, but the air still felt dense against her skin, thick with fuel fumes, dust, and the electric tension of a crowd waiting for one decent decision. "You are making this harder than it needs to be," Blake said at last, though everyone standing there could see the opposite was true. Naomi turned her head slightly and met Ryan's eyes for the first time. There was no plea in her expression, no trembling request for mercy, only a steady, searching look that seemed to ask whether he was really willing to stand there and let a lie become official. He looked away first. Mrs. Evelyn Brooks took another step forward from the repair shop entrance, her shoes scraping the concrete. "Officer, if you had time to put cuffs on her, then you had time to read the plate," she said. "And if you had time to ignore her documents, then you had time to ignore the truth." The words settled hard over the lot. The mother by the minivan nodded quietly while still recording. The little boy in the back seat had gone silent now, his eyes wide, absorbing a lesson no child should have to learn this early, that grown men in uniform could stand in the open and still fail to be fair. Inside the convenience store, the cashier pushed through the door and called out. The station cameras cover the pumps, the front lot, and the curb by the street. Everything from the last hour is saved automatically. Naomi closed her eyes for half a second, not in defeat, but in relief. The truth had more than one witness now. It had a timeline. It had angles. It had memory that could not be intimidated. Blake finally turned toward the cashier with a look of irritation so sharp it almost betrayed panic. "No one asked you," he said, but that only made the silence around him harsher. Because everyone understood what he was really saying. He was not angry about interference. He was angry that the story was escaping him. Ryan took a breath, then stepped toward the open driver's door of the Honda before Blake could stop him. He leaned inside, glanced at the glove compartment, and found the registration exactly where Naomi had said it would be. He pulled it out slowly, unfolded it, and stared at the printed name under the fading light. Naomi Carter. The same address on her driver's license. The same plate on the car. The same vehicle identification number visible through the windshield. For a second, Ryan just stood there, holding the paper like it had weight far beyond a few ounces. Then he looked back at Blake, and whatever hesitation had lived in him all afternoon finally turned into something colder. Not courage yet, but realization. Realization that this was now documented from every side. Realization that paperwork, camera footage, and witness statements were beginning to line up in a way no report could smooth over. Realization that the woman standing in cuffs beside a broken-down Honda had been telling the truth from the first word. And as the evening sun dropped lower behind the auto shop roof, it became painfully clear that the person losing control of the scene was not Naomi Carter. It was the man who had mistaken prejudice for authority. Ryan held the registration in his hand for only a moment, but that moment was enough to change the atmosphere completely. The paper itself was ordinary, a little worn at the edges, folded and unfolded the way real documents always are when they live in a glove compartment for years, but under the gas station lights, it looked almost devastating. Naomi Carter. Matching plate number. Matching vehicle identification number. Matching make and model. Facts. Clean and simple. The kind that should have ended the entire encounter before it had even begun. Ryan looked from the registration to Naomi, then back to Blake Turner, and the silence between the two officers suddenly said more than either of them wanted the crowd to hear. Naomi remained standing exactly where they had placed her, wrists still restrained, shoulders steady, chin level. The humiliation had not broken her. If anything, it had sharpened the contrast now unfolding in front of everyone. One person had told the truth from the first minute. The other had built an accusation and then kept feeding it long after the facts were available. "It is her car," Ryan said at last. And even though his voice was not loud, it carried across the lot with the weight of a confession. No one reacted right away. It was as if the crowd needed one full second to let the words settle, to understand that the woman who had been treated like a suspect had been exactly who she said she was all along. Then Evelyn Brooks let out a slow breath through her nose and shook her head with the kind of disappointment that comes from being proven right in the worst possible way. The mother by the minivan lowered her phone for half a second, looked at Naomi, then lifted it again with a firmer grip. The man by the pickup muttered something under his breath and turned away, not because he wanted to leave, but because some kinds of public shame are difficult to look at directly. Blake did not thank Ryan. He did not apologize. He did not step forward and admit what everyone now knew. Instead, his jaw tightened, and his eyes moved toward the witnesses, toward the phones, toward the blinking red camera beneath the awning, as if he were calculating how much of the damage could still be controlled. That was when Naomi spoke again, and this time her voice was softer than before, which somehow made it land even harder. "You had the truth the whole time," she said. There was no anger in it, no raised volume, no dramatic flourish. Just exhaustion, dignity, and the unbearable clarity of a woman naming what had just happened to her in front of everyone. Imagine being publicly restrained, doubted, and talked down to, only to watch the evidence prove that none of it had ever been necessary. Imagine how quiet a crowd becomes when certainty collapses and leaves only accountability standing there in the heat. Ryan swallowed and looked at the cuffs, then at Blake again. "We need to take them off," he said. This time it was not hesitation. It was procedure finally catching up to what should have been obvious. For a long second Blake said nothing. The cruiser engine hummed behind him. A receipt fluttered across the lot and caught against the curb. Somewhere down the block, a siren wailed and faded. Life was still moving. But inside that gas station parking lot, time had narrowed to one simple question. Would he keep clinging to pride, or would he admit that the cameras, the paperwork, and the witnesses had already answered for him? Then the cashier spoke from the doorway, voice steady, almost casual, as if reading out a truth that could no longer be denied. The footage from the front camera shows her pulling in alone almost 20 minutes before you arrived. Put up, key in hand. No one else touched that car. Another layer, another angle, another nail in the lie. Naomi closed her eyes for the briefest instant, not to retreat from the moment, but to steady herself inside it. Because now the truth was no longer just visible. It was complete. And in the hard fluorescent spill from the convenience store and the fading orange light of evening, the real story had finally stepped forward where everyone could see it. For Blake Turner, the truth did not arrive like a revelation. It arrived like a corner closing in. You could see it in the way his shoulders stiffened, in the way his eyes stopped scanning for answers and started scanning for exits, in the way the confidence that had filled the lot only minutes earlier now seemed to drain out of him under the glare of witnesses, documents, and recorded proof. Ryan stepped forward first. His movements were careful, almost mechanical, as if he were trying to restore order to a moment that had already broken beyond repair. When the restraints finally came off Naomi's wrists, the sound was quiet, but it carried through the parking lot like a verdict. Naomi did not rub her hands right away. She simply lowered them slowly, letting the blood return, letting the air touch skin that should never have been bound in the first place. The fading light caught the marks left by metal, and for one sharp second the entire crowd could see what suspicion had done when it was allowed to speak louder than truth. No one cheered. No one clapped. The moment was too heavy for that. Evelyn Brooks walked toward Naomi with the steady pace of someone who understood that dignity sometimes needs company more than words. "You all right, honey?" she asked softly. Naomi nodded once, though the answer was more complicated than that. How do you explain being publicly humiliated, then instantly proven right, and still feeling the weight of what people had been willing to believe about you? How do you stand there in the same parking lot, under the same sky, and act like something permanent has not just shifted inside you? Blake cleared his throat as if he might speak, but whatever apology he considered never fully formed. Maybe pride strangled it. Maybe fear did. Maybe he understood that some words come too late to matter once the truth has already been seen from every angle. The mother by the minivan was still recording. The little boy in the back seat had not looked away once. The cashier stood in the doorway with folded arms, and the man from the pickup remained beside his truck, staring at Blake with open contempt now that uncertainty had been stripped from the scene. Ryan handed Naomi her registration with a face gone pale from the realization of what had just happened. "Ma'am," he said, voice low, "your information checks out." It was an absurd sentence, small and bureaucratic, almost insulting in its understatement. Naomi took the paper without breaking eye contact. "It checked out before you ever touched me," she replied. That landed harder than any accusation could have, because she was right. The evidence had not changed. Only their willingness to see it had. Somewhere behind them, a phone notification chimed. Then another. One of the bystanders had already sent the video. The mother looked down at her screen, then back at the officers, and something unspoken passed through the crowd. This was no longer staying in a parking lot on Fulton Avenue. This was going to move. Through text chains, through neighborhood pages, through community groups, through every space where people knew exactly what this kind of moment meant before the official report even had a chance to rewrite it. Imagine being so certain of your power that you do not realize the cameras are turning your confidence into evidence. Imagine realizing too late that every word you dismissed, every witness you ignored, every fact you brushed aside is now the reason your authority is collapsing in public. Blake finally looked up at the gas station camera, then at the phone still pointed in his direction, and for the first time all evening, he looked like a man who understood he had made a mistake too large to hide behind a badge. Naomi slipped the registration into her purse with steady fingers and turned toward her car. The hood was still open. The engine was still dead. The day was still exhausting. But the story was no longer theirs to control. The truth had been recorded, repeated, and released into the world, and somewhere beyond that lot, consequences had already begun moving toward the men who thought they could walk away from this with everything intact. By the next morning, Fulton Avenue was no longer just a stretch of cracked pavement beside a gas station and a repair shop. It had become a place people pointed to when they talked about what happens when power gets too comfortable and truth refuses to stay quiet. The videos had spread exactly the way Evelyn Brooks knew they would. First through neighborhood group chats, then across local social pages, then into the hands of people who understood procedure well enough to see every failure without needing anyone to explain it. The gas station footage showed Naomi pulling in alone, exhausted and careful, raising the hood with her own key still in hand. The phone videos captured the commands, the dismissive tone, the moment evidence was ignored in favor of assumption. The dash camera from the cruiser filled in the rest, sealing the timeline with the cold precision only a machine can provide. By noon, the department could not treat it like a misunderstanding anymore. Officer Blake Turner was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Officer Ryan Cole was also removed from active duty while Internal Affairs reviewed the stop, the detention, and every decision that followed. The statement from the department called it a matter of serious concern. The public called it what it looked like. Naomi did not go looking for cameras, interviews, or revenge. She spent the next day at home with an ice pack across her wrists, her phone buzzing so often she finally turned it face down on the kitchen table just to hear herself think. Her sister called twice. Her supervisor from the nursing home left a voice message telling her to take whatever time she needed. Mrs. Evelyn Brooks dropped by with groceries, a pie wrapped in foil, and the kind of silence that only old wisdom knows how to offer. Because some wounds do not need noise. They need witness. Late that afternoon, Attorney Daniel Hayes arrived at Naomi's apartment carrying a slim leather folder and a face sharpened by purpose. He was not flashy, not loud, not interested in turning her pain into spectacle. He had already reviewed the available footage, requested preservation orders, and spoken to the department before he ever knocked on her door. They cannot bury this, he told her gently. There are too many angles, too many records, too many people who saw exactly what happened. Naomi sat across from him at her small kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea she had forgotten to drink, and listened without interruption. She was tired in a way sleep could not fix. Not because the truth had failed her, but because it had been forced to work so hard to rescue something that should never have been taken in the first place. Imagine needing cameras, witnesses, paperwork, and public outrage just to prove you deserve the presumption of innocence beside your own car. Imagine how many people never get that many chances for the truth to survive. A week later, Blake Turner walked out of the station without his badge. Ryan Cole resigned before the review board finished its findings. The city announced policy changes, retraining, and oversight as if new language could erase old instincts. It could not. Naomi knew that. Evelyn knew that. The whole neighborhood knew that. But consequences still mattered. Records still mattered. The truth still mattered. And when Naomi finally returned to the gas station to pick up her repaired Honda, she stood for a moment beneath the same blinking camera that had watched everything unfold. The evening air was cooler now. The noise of traffic moved around her in a steady hum. She placed one hand on the roof of her car, closed her eyes, and let the stillness settle over her. They had looked at her and seen suspicion. The camera had looked at all of them and found the real danger. And in the end, that was the part no badge could outrun.